Welcome to the third annual GradFUTURES Forum hosted by the Graduate School at Princeton University. My name is Eva Kubu and I'm the Associate Dean for Professional Development and Director of the GradFUTURES Initiative, led by the Graduate School and fueled by a robust ecosystem of campus partners, faculty, alumni, graduate student leaders, and industry partners. We're delighted you could join us for the third year of this annual event, and thank you as well for joining us in person. We're coming to you live from the Chancellor Green Rotunda, and as with most virtual events, we had a few hiccups this morning, so thank you for your patience as we kick off. This week-long Professional Development Conference was designed to meet the imperative of graduate student professional development at this moment and to signal the graduate school's strong commitment to preparing our PhD students for the future of work and empowering them with the clarity, competencies, and connections and confidence they need now and in the future. This is our final day, and there were more than a dozen engaging keynote speakers, skill-building workshops, networking sessions, all highlighting diverse career options within and beyond the academy, and we have many, many more sessions coming up today with inspirational stories and practical advice and ways to build connections and community for our graduate students. To extend my sincere thanks to my team, Assistant Dean James Van Wyk, our coordinator Laura Christensen, and all of our graduate student fellows and associates for their efforts in putting together this year's forum. The support of the entire graduate school staff and our campus-wide coalition, the Professional Development Working Group, and all of our amazing graduate alumni to whom we owe a debt of gratitude for their ongoing support of GradFUTURES. It is my pleasure to introduce this morning's session on inclusive leadership. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is one of the 8 core competencies of the GradFUTURES professional development model. This is based on university priorities as well as trends that we're seeing in the workforce across all industries, where we see increased emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the importance of all of these skills at every level. The Inclusive Leadership Learning Cohort was established in fall of 2020 in response to President Eisgruber's call to action for the university community to explore ways to eradicate systemic racism. This cohort represented a partnership between the Access, Diversity, and Inclusion teams and the professional development teams at the graduate school. These 2 efforts represent the graduate school's priorities and are interconnected in that providing increased access also involves creating equitable access to opportunities within and beyond Princeton. As part of this series, speakers share personal stories, practical strategies, and ways they promoted individual and collective action. This included an expert facilitator, Dr. Jordan West, Assistant Provost for Diversity and Inclusion at George Washington University, and our moderator today, Shawn Maxam, who leads sessions on inclusive innovation, along with Vice Dean for Innovation, Rod Priestley, who will be coincidentally joining the graduate school as our new dean this June. Shawn Maxam is Associate Provost for Diversity and Inclusion. In this role, he leads strategic partnerships and projects associated with campus climate, academic departments, data analysis, and history and sense of place, among other priorities. Shawn joined the Provost's office in 2016 as Assistant Director. He has been a strong partner to the GradFUTURES team and is committed to increasing competencies in diversity, equity, and inclusion across the entire campus community for faculty, for staff, and for all students. Please join me in welcoming Shawn Maxam.
All right, good morning, everybody. We got another awesome person joining the panel. All right. Good to see everybody this morning. I'm glad the sun started to come out. So why don't we hop right in? So what I'm going to ask our esteemed panelists to do is first introduce themselves, their department, what year they're in, and a snippet of their dissertation. These are all incredible dissertations. We could spend 2 hours unpacking it, but let's just give a quick snippet. So Nick, why don't we start with you?
I get to go first. Hi everybody, I'm Nick Shaket-Levy. I'm a 5th year PhD candidate in the Public Policy School. My research is on how climate change is affecting smallholder farmers, especially in South Asia. I just came back from a trip to Nepal to do field research and looking at how that affects migration patterns.
Yeah, I'm Rebecca Haig. I'm a fourth year in the religion department, and my dissertation explores violence and gendered piety in the ancient world.
Hi, my name is Yuzhou Bai. I'm a seventh year in East Asian Studies. My dissertation explores meritocratic discourses in early medieval China.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Yang Yu. I'm a fourth year PhD candidate at the Department of Spanish and Portuguese upstairs of this beautiful building. I'm writing a dissertation on the 16th to 18th century multicultural and cross-cultural communication and most of all, anti-colonial subjectivity of the Chinese under the Spanish rule, where I got to look at the amazing multilingual manuscript in the colonial archive, which were unknown and unexposed. And thank you for letting us be here.
Awesome. So make sure you go to their dissertation defense, oral defenses when they come up. All right, fantastic. So we have a rich diversity, both disciplines and also research and scholarship. So I think this is going to be a robust conversation. So the first thing I want to ask is, I want to invite each of you to describe your motivation for getting involved in the program. Would you mind sharing parts of your sort of lived experience in the past that influenced your decision to get involved? Why don't we start with you, Nick?
Sure, yeah, so for me it was I saw this program as kind of a way to formalize some discussions and questions that I've been thinking about for the last year or two. So like in 2020, when a lot of departments were starting to think more explicitly about diversity, equity, and inclusion, in the public policy school, and specifically in our department, which is more geared towards like climate and environmental research, a lot of us students were thinking about how we can better take into account perspectives about environmental justice. We realized that a lot of our research doesn't explicitly account for this, and we hadn't really kind of had a formalized way to think about like the different theories and perspectives, but also the different ways in which we could work with stakeholders on environmental justice. So we actually, before starting this program, like in the spring of last year, we had like an initial workshop with other experts in the field, but I felt like, at least me personally, I was still kind of stuck in terms of how to operationalize that into something that could be kind of part of our department going forward. And so that's about the time when I saw I think it was actually this forum last year, I heard some people talk about this program. And I was like, this could be a really cool way to just think about like kind of frameworks around diversity and inclusion more broadly, and especially how personally I can maybe incorporate that into my leadership or service kind of activities.
Yeah, to follow up on that, I think sort of it was twofold for me. On the one hand, I've been getting involved in professional development and sort of working for a think tank and sort of putting myself out there outside of academia. And so I began to think about it in that context. But I'd also already been thinking about it in terms of my pedagogy and what it would mean to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion concretely once I began teaching. And I was also exploring courses to teach, and I wanted some real practical advice, concrete steps. What should I do? What shouldn't I do? How do I really apply this in a real world context? So that's why I participated.
Yeah, for me, I agree, sort of related to what has been shared so far, but intellectually, my study has been greatly inspired by the contemporary discussions of social mobility and the social production of inequality in the American context, even though I study ancient China. So I think a lot of the issue of DEI just appear in the discussions that I read when I was framing my research in a different historical context. So that was when I think I got very interested in learning more about the stuff that's going on in this emerging important space. And I think personally, I am an immigrant. I'm an international student here. So I think a lot of the process of getting to learn about DEI, I think, is the process of rediscovering a lot of the experiences that I've had in this country. It was kind of, I think, this program actually built into my experience, I think, both in my development, both professionally and personally. Yes.
I agree 100% of what everyone has said. I really want to echo Rebecca. leadership really appeals to me. I really start thinking about this when I start teaching as well. I am a passionate teacher, so starting second year at department, we start to teach daily a language course of undergraduate student of all level, and I also taught entire year through the pandemic, online, daily on Zoom, which was a very interesting experience I would like to share about. I think it's really during the pandemic when I started teaching online, I noticed a lot of things that just haven't in person, because in person I see my students every day, I talk to them every day, I know they're well mentally and physically, but online I've had students who had a broken Wi-Fi, I've had students who had to take care of her baby cousin while taking class. I think this made me to think about what it means to be a graduate student and a teacher, and I really believe in the power of education using inclusive approach in diverse educational settings, and that's what motivated me to come to this cohort and learn more about what it means to be DEI as a graduate student in our research and teaching. Thank you.
Thank you all. It's really helpful. So there's both the notion of like the sort of real world applications, both of your research and scholarship, but also thinking about how to embed DEI into your research and teaching holistically and comprehensively. And this notion about how the impact of the pandemic, the sort of racial reckoning that has happened, all of those sort of evoked notions of thinking about how to be a, sort of global scholar citizen in the world, and this notion about even the integration of the meaning making and sense making that happens if you engage in a sort of process that also gives context to your own experiences and the things that you have also personally experienced. So thank you for that. So we know that the work of diversity, equity, inclusion in higher education spaces is nuanced and complex and often requires a great deal of thought to effectively communicate to many audiences within a university. Nicole Hannah-Jones, the Knight Chair in Race and Journalism at Howard University and the creator of the 1619 Project said in 2017, our job as storytellers, if we want to get people to think about things that seem fixed, is to figure out a way to make them see the story in a different way. With this in mind, can each of you speak about the process you went through to fine-tune your story, to talk about your action plans and to sort of get buy-in from campus stakeholders? What did you learn about the role of sort of storytelling and communication?
Yeah, I guess I'll go. I think for me, so I can think of like two quick things. So for me, when I came into the cohort, I had already had some discussions with kind of mostly students in our department about like whether we could put together a reading group on environmental justice or if there's something we could do together. I think the cohort, it wasn't like rocket science, but it was a really good kind of set of tools for thinking about who are the other stakeholders, like think more broadly about who are the other stakeholders that you would want to include in that initiative. If you're going through the time to like really try to change something, why stop at just like a few students in your department? Why not think about reaching out to other departments, to administration, et cetera? So like tangibly for my plan, I think going through that kind of step and thinking about like doing the power analysis and stakeholder analysis, maybe think more broadly about what kind of broader story I guess we can tell about not just our department, but the university. Maybe I'll leave it there, but yeah, maybe later on I'll talk about just personally like my development and story making there.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm jumping the gun a bit, but one of the things that we were encouraged to think about was our spheres of influence. And so that's another way of kind of framing your story, right? Like, so for my project, I was thinking in my immediate sphere of influence in the religion department, but then it encouraged me to think more broadly, okay, what is the impact of these kinds of initiatives more globally for workforce, for students going outside of Princeton? What does that story look like beyond the gates of Princeton? So I think also practically practicing, right, communicating my plan to people that I wanted to get involved, to other graduate students, to other departments, to other programs, really kept refining that process of learning how to tell a story.
Yeah, and I did like a website, web page actually, as part of the East Asian Studies program's website. And the idea was to track the career trajectory of our alumni. Where are they and what type of careers are they, career paths are they treading? And when I initiated the project, I think one of the pillars I envisioned was to include like the diversity and inclusion perspective into that. So I had to kind of advocate on this, on the alumni's behalf to include like our graduate alumni of color and our graduate alumni who work in other continents outside the US context, because I think those are the type of experiences that didn't get highlighted enough when I, based on my experience at Princeton in my program. So, I mean, that webpage is live now, so if you have a time, check it out. But I'm really proud of that, and I think that a lot of this, I think strengths in doing those advocacy actually came from this program that taught me the importance to always, advocate in things that I believe in.
Future's website is amazing. Everyone should check out. I think following up on professional development and storytelling, I think I really believe in the power of storytelling. I think a lot of from what I learned from this cohort is I believe we all came to Princeton with a deep little personal reason, also intellectual reason, but personal stories that can show rich lived experience that could somehow impact our community. So after this cohort, in my current role as professional development associate for the humanities department, I was very fortunate with the help of Eva and James to initiate a series called Humanities Out of Box, Becoming Leaders in Education, Business, and Beyond, where I invited several alumni, PhD alumni in humanities, and talking about what it means to be alumni, what it means to include inclusive teaching and diversity practice in their current role in amazing different countries in amazing fields. And one of it is the diversity director I invited from University of Virginia, Catalina Escalera-Piet from University of Virginia, and she specifically talked about why she got interested in DEI and how her life and her PhD training and how her similar program in University of Michigan, just like our cohort, really influenced her career choice, really influenced what she's passionate about doing. And I think I see a lot of her in us, hopefully, and I think we will take on the lesson we learned in this cohort and take on to whatever amazing careers that we'll take on in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you all talked a lot about sort of your spheres of influence, sort of building connections and creating sort of coalitions. So we know, change happens through sort of coalition building as well. So I thought that was really telling. I think we've gone a couple minutes, and actually you all haven't had the opportunity to talk about your action plan. So why don't you describe them briefly for everyone and sort of talk about the part of the action plan that you're sort of most excited about.
I can start. So when I was drafting the action plan, I think that was when a lot of anti-Asian racism was starting to appear in the national news. So specifically, I was thinking about what concrete ways I can contribute to facilitate a better environment for the Asian students and scholars at Princeton campuses, and I think specifically related to my background, thinking about ways that help immigrants to navigate not just being a professional here, but also being an immigrant in here, what type of resources we could find. So one of the things that this action plan has led me to is to participate in a working group within the ACSSPU, Association of Chinese Scholars and Students at Princeton University. We were at that time trying to connect with a lot of the faculty members and staff members at the university with Chinese backgrounds, and so we organized several meetups, basically communicating our concerns for the university, for the environment with the faculty members. So it kind of goes back to what Shawn just said, kind of building these correlations, but we are trying to expand and building new channels to get our voices out. And I was actually at the meeting yesterday, and I'm really glad to see that the university is starting to take proactive actions to address a lot of the concerns. So it's always going to be an ongoing process, but I think I'm just really glad that I contributed a little bit to this.
You contributed a lot of it. So.
Yeah.
I can go. So my project is loosely titled Religious Literacy 101, and it's a religious literacy cohort for graduate students and undergraduate students, hopefully starting next year, where graduate students will be volunteering to teach a number of different sessions on different aspects of religion, right? Like religious calendars, like religious dietary restrictions, the intersection of race, religion, the intersection of gender and religion, things that students who may not ever walk into a religion department might actually need to know when they go out into the workforce. And my project was really inspired because I've always thought religion was incredibly fascinating. Most people don't agree. But I often would get sort of like one of two things, like you study religion because you're religious, or why does religion really matter? And looking at the world around us, especially the workforce in the 21st century, religion is a huge part of people's identity. Even if you're an atheist, you're in some way shaped by religion. And so I think to be a good humanist in the workforce, it means being aware of the people around you in this huge facet of many of their identities. So that's I was really excited about this project, both because it intersected with a sphere of influence that I actually could do something about, but also because I'd been thinking about it for a long time. With a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and trainings that I had experienced, religion is often mentioned offhand, but I think it is far more important, and it remains so in the 21st century. So,
I love that.
I can talk about my action plan. So my action plan actually addresses the importance and I think the possibility of women PhD students, of mentoring and community support for women PhD students in the humanities. And the reason I really start to think about that is I have amazing women advisor who always says, I support you 100% for whatever you want to do, whatever with your career, with your dissertation. And she told me about her experience when she was getting her PhD in the 90s at Princeton, how she was really discouraged to continue her study because of her identity as woman. And I was really struck because I never thought about the importance of community support and the mentoring because I have them. And as we talk about a lot of storytelling and sphere of influence, I think it really started within my department, and a lot of my friends would sometimes came to me and talk about the same concerns I have and the social pressure and expectation as women PhDs in humanities. And I have found out that my many amazing friends are doing a lot of programs for women PhD students in STEM. There is the Council for Women in STEM, and they also have a Women in STEM listening circle organized by the university counseling system, but there wasn't a program for our parallel counterpart, the women PhD student in the humanities. And I really, in my role at Professional Development Associate, I think one way to approach this was to empower women and those who identify as so, the possibility of professional development and all the amazing skills, confidence they can build while pursuing their PhD. I personally think this would greatly benefit not just women PhD students in the humanities, but our university ambience to support inclusively of all identities and groups as in general.
Yeah, that's very cool. And mine is I guess similar to what I was saying before. So I was working on an action plan to kind of set up a reading group, a cross-departmental reading group on PhD students who are interested in incorporating environmental justice, and especially how to work with community-based research. So the idea, we're still working on it, but the idea would be that we would meet like once a month and have like different students lead discussions, bring some papers or book chapters that are relevant to their field, and kind of exchange best practices on how to do that kind of community-based research in an equitable way. And we're still hoping to have like some sort of kind of toolkit that we can give new students when they come in. That was another part of the leadership cohort that was interesting to me, was trying to think about like what those spheres of influence and those like time kind of periods of intervention might be where you might have the most influence. And so for me, it was like if I was starting a PhD again, having that kind of set of resources at the beginning, like when I come into the department, and thinking about this like kind of from the beginning when I'm thinking about my research questions would be interesting. So that's kind of where we're headed now.
Yeah, no, it's very powerful, and I'm struck both by how you all's action plans both talk about sort of identity. So whether it's the immigrant identity and being a sort of Chinese or Chinese American identity, the identity of women, but also women in the humanities, the religious identity, which to Rebecca's point is often like superfluously mentioned in DEI, but it's a core part of how people, their value systems in the world. And then also how, the identity of sort of the community, right? The community that a university or institution is nestled in. Like, how do you engage in a broader community and do research that is equitable and ethical as well? That brings to mind that in his introduction to the university's inaugural Diversity, Equity, Inclusion annual report, President Eisgruber wrote, "The excellence of this university depends on attracting, supporting, and embracing talented people from all backgrounds and with a variety of perspectives and viewpoints. So in different ways, each of your action plans contributes to President Eisgruber's vision." One of the things I would like to ask you is, what would you ideally see as the end result of your action plan if resources were no obstacle, right? It's like, oh, just imagine there's no constraints ever. What outcomes and impact would you like to see emerge from your action plans in the long term?
Well, I would like to see it continue after I graduate, to see other graduate students continue the program, it be successful, to have undergraduates continue to participate. And in an ideal world, I'd love for it to be turned into a formal certificate program for undergrads, but I have no control over that.
I can go really quick. So I think for me, I would, similar to Rebecca, I would like to have kind of this discussion group be an ongoing thing that outlives like the current cohort of students, and ideally have a set of tools for like incoming students, like I mentioned. I do want to mention, so one, I think the constraint for us is not necessarily money, but probably the biggest challenge I faced when I was like talking to other people about this is that everybody has a different concept of what environmental justice means. And especially some people, especially interestingly from like a DEI perspective, a lot of times when I was speaking with students from different countries, like that concept just wasn't something that was discussed in those countries. Like it was called something else, different concept, and it might have been something to do more with like colonialism or that kind of thing. So trying to think about how to like have a broad enough tent where we can capture enough diverse people who take part in this cohort, but still have it be like relevant for people's research. I think that balance is the trickiest thing in terms of like whether this will be useful and kind of live past the current cohort.
I think, well, I personally, I'm a firm believer of like Taoist philosophy, so which basically says like not doing things leads to like the most organic like outcome and harmony. So I feel like the ideal outcome of like the activism I have been involved is really just like that people in the future will no longer need to do this type of activism. They just step into this Princeton environment and feels like they're included and feels like they're well supported and feels like they're not, being judged based on the labels that, that has been attached to them based on identity or anything like that. So I feel like that will be like the ideal outcome. I don't know how to achieve that, but that's like the mental picture I have. Yeah.
I agree with Yuzhou, but I don't know if that will happen for women PhD students soon. But I think one thing, even though we won't imagine that we don't need to do anything, like as everything is in its utopic and ideal stage, I think we can do is to incorporate the program into long-term programs such as graduate student orientation, and listed all the possible mentoring and community supports and introduce them early and maybe to champions, ambassadors of the mentor system where they would know where to seek help if they need it at any stage of their PhD, or if they have a listening circle where they can trust and talk to as a running part of their PhD life and know where to go and where to build community. I think that would be a great thing I want to see in long term after I graduate.
Yeah, so you both all sort of identified ensuring things are sustainable, they live beyond your time here at the university. that it's embedded in our practices of what we do, right? It's sort of baked in. It's not, and it's not, at the margins. But to you, Joe's point, right? It's also like the future that we always aspire to, right? Around sort of justice work is that the world will be just, and there will be no need for future notions of activism and advocacy. So I think that's also really powerful. So, it's interesting, some of the themes that I saw when you all were both talking about your things, and was that inclusive leadership often means redefining what leadership means. Graduate students at Princeton have power to implement inclusive practices in teaching, research, and departmental level activities. Identifying actionable steps to make ordinary day-to-day tasks more inclusive can yield significant results. And it's often difficult to know how and with whom to get started implementing more inclusive practices, but there's a lot of opportunity to work across departments. But the logistics of it, especially agreeing on common frameworks, to Nick's points, for DR work can take planning. And then really the importance of having enough time to reflect well and implement change is a challenge for us all. So those are some of the common themes as I sort of read through you all's summaries of your plans, et cetera. So I don't know if before we turn to questions, if you all saw any kind of threads in the conversation that we were having that you all felt are connective or are useful.
I mean, one of the things that both in this program and in other programs I've done with GradFuture is you realize that you can leverage a lot with a PhD from Princeton that you don't really think about, right?
Yeah.
And also that your experience as a PhD student at Princeton, especially for humanities people, you don't often think, I actually have a lot of skills. I can communicate with people, I can network, I can manage a project. And once you see yourself in that way, you really gain the confidence to go out there and do concrete things in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I feel like when I started the website project, my instinct as a researcher just told me get data. So that's why I approached the GradFutures, my team members, asking for can I get some of the exit survey data from the PhD alum from my department, because I know that going down this way, when I communicate with my department, when I talk to the faculty member, these are the type of information they want to see. If I want to get departmental buy-ins, these are the things I have to demonstrate and craft an argument based on actual data and also stories. I do feel like we as PhDs, we can contribute a lot by just using our research, problem-solving skills. Princeton has an amazing institutional research team, but I think from the grad student side, we can do a lot of grassroots work, complementing the efforts that were coming from the university.
I just want to add on that I really think this learning cohort and specific program of inclusive leadership, DEI, really, I think, enabled me to think about my passion and how I can take a step further, maybe take out a little bit of my comfort zone to go out to the world and go to the community and think about inclusive teaching, inclusive research. And I was really actually encouraged after this to apply for the prison teaching program, which I always wanted to do, but because of COVID and it's just kind of nothing happened. I really, and in my teaching with the East Jersey State Prison, I just really think like I was really thinking about a lot of concepts and the things I learned from from Dr. Renita Miller talk about what inclusive teaching is. And it's just during that very special teaching time and I realized that we can do more. As Princeton PhD student, that we will go out to the world and apply what we learned from maybe this one certificate program and many others we do and really contribute something to our community.
I would just add too, I think one thing that's come through this panel discussion, and I think that was a real strength of the Inclusive Leadership Program and the GradFutures, was really the connection between like our own personal identities, stories, skills, like kind of weaknesses, and then how do you translate that to like working with other people and also recognizing other people's kind of narratives and skills and all that. I think the program really did a great job of balancing those two, because I think without that kind of self-reflection, it's really tough to know how you can intervene effectively in the system. If it's too much self-reflection, you don't think about kind of how you work with others, then that's great, but it doesn't really help you with the leadership part. But I think one thing that's come through with kind of everybody's story is just how much we've all thought about our own personal stories and how we can kind of contribute that to the communities that we work with.
Yeah, I mean, I think you all are both talking about utilizing both the incredible resources that are from the institution, but that you also bring, both in the skills you've developed as PhD students, but also your lived experience, right, to be leaders and inclusive leaders, and to do the thing that we all think is important in the nation's service and the service to humanity, right? So it's all of the us together that are going to be able to change the world for the better. So I want to open it up for the audience to ask any questions that you may have for Nick, Rebecca, Yujo, and Yang Yu. And I know you have a lot of questions.
Questions for the panel. How well have your efforts been received amongst your fellow grad students?
Really well. I think for getting graduate students involved in anything, it's a question of how much time they have. So it's finding the right people who are interested enough but also have time. So I pretty quickly filled out the cohort I needed. I still need a few more volunteers, but we're almost there. So pretty well received.
I think in my case, it was something that we were talking about before I took on the cohort, the idea of having a group of people having a reading group about environmental justice. I think, again, the challenge is everybody comes at it from different perspectives and might have a different, what environmental justice looks like in Nepal, where I just was, is probably going to be different than what it looks like in, let's say, New Orleans, and thinking about how hurricanes impact communities differently in New Orleans. So, and those are we have those kinds of research in our department, right? So I think we're still trying to think through what can we do that's going to be useful to everybody, or at least a critical mass of people. But everybody's super interested in this kind of work.
Can I add one more thing as well? For my idea, the other piece of that was focusing on giving graduate students an opportunity to teach. And I did that strategically because I wanted a buy-in for them in addition to, hey, you can think about diversity, equity, and inclusion for your teaching, but also this is another thing to put in your CV. So I was trying to be intersectional in the way I was framing it. So I think that's also something to think about, not just the different pieces that may also intersect with your project.
Yeah.
Just want to add one more thing about inclusive leadership in terms of professional development. When I was organizing the event, I talked to my peers in my department of Spanish and Portuguese. And then at the first event, half of my department showed up. And then everyone was really interested. And I think when we think about inclusive leadership as speaking to the students' needs, and we really need, and we really also on their mind, they are also very interested in contributing the same way that we have been doing, and that's being warming to me, and a lot of people are thinking about doing this and also the same thing for GradFUTURES and for the university too.
Other questions? They just gave an amazing, okay, go ahead. So did it create interdisciplinary sort of connections or threads throughout the sort of process?
For me, it certainly did, because I think, just as a matter of fact, a lot of the Chinese students and scholars here are in STEMs and engineering fields. They stay in spaces I normally, as a humanities PhD, would not step into. So I think the process of, meeting together and then discussing our identity and figuring out ways to advocate for ourselves creates connections that I think allow me to collaborate with them on other fronts as well. For example, last summer I was doing an internship that actually required me to do some research on basically one key aspect of the life of the STEM grad students on campus. I was doing a report of the type of shared research services that were in university campuses. I was trying to put together a report, and in that process, I had to find some grad students in the STEM fields to interview and ask about how they utilize those services. What is their experience? So definitely, I think it helped me build a lot of connections outside the humanities space that I was, kind of putting myself in for and comfortably living in for a long time. Yeah.
I can add on a little bit. I think Yujo talked about how he really connected them and humanities, and I was thinking about all the events I've been to and also organized and helped coordinate. Really brought together all students from within the humanities, even though we, for example, in this building, there are 5 language department, and we never know who they are talking about, and we don't know our peer graduate student. It's an event like this at the university level that brought them together, even though we really have a lot of similar backgrounds and skills. I feel like it was so great to see how we actually had similar concern, but also similar things that we wanted to contribute, even though before this, it's actually created an opportunity for us to meet and just like we all met here and we wouldn't meet each other without the programs that GradFuture provided, and I think there will be more community like that because of the diversity of program that it offers.
Yeah. In my case, I had a really good opportunity last fall while I was in part of the cohort to talk with somebody from archaeology who does a lot of community research. And that was something I probably wouldn't have thought about, to be honest. Like, for a lot of archaeologists, like it's hard to, I would imagine it's hard to do research without being in the community. So they have a lot of really great lived experience about, even if it's not necessarily policy related specifically, like how to work equitably with communities in different parts of the world. And that was one of the best conversations I had in terms of like thinking about resources for how we could apply that to our department. So that was a really great interdisciplinary connection.
Yeah, so there's something to be said about even having opportunities to bring people together across disciplines to have generative discussions about sort of both ideas, interesting strategies, lived experience that are just useful and dynamic and vibrant. So, yeah. Well, if you don't have any questions now, we're going to put their emails up, right? Or something. So you can reach out, because these people are awesome. I want to thank the panelists, both for their time today, but also for their ongoing inclusive leadership. I know that the impact you've already made in your departments and at Princeton have been substantial. And as you go out into the future and the variety of leadership roles that you're going to take, I know you're going to take this experience with you. So really appreciate your openness, honesty, and candor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shawn.
Thank you.
Let me echo those words and say thank you so much to Shawn for coordinating this panel and this wonderful conversation with our panelists. From their action plans and the ways the cohort has informed their research, their teaching, and their perspectives on future professional endeavors, it is clear that graduate students who participate will continue to have an impact on our campus, in their communities, and throughout their professional journey. Nicholas, Rebecca, Yujo, and Yang Yu, it has been such a pleasure getting to know each of you, and the more than 60 graduate students that have come through the cohort. I personally learned so much from your reflections, from our weekly discussions, and really I just think I applaud you for also openly and candidly sharing your perspectives. It takes courage to do that, and often the conversations in our cohort were challenging. We were in the midst of current events and going through a cohort experience centered around inclusivity. So as you might imagine, there were lots of ways that we needed to lean into listening to understand and having empathy for one another. Really, I think all of us have a role to play, as Shawn mentioned, and our graduate students are really at the forefront as scholars, researchers, and professionals, and in everything that they do now and in the future as inclusive and equity-minded leaders. Thank you. The journey will continue. Next month, our Access, Diversity, and Inclusion team, led by my colleague, Dean Renita Miller at the Graduate School, will host an Inclusive Academy Symposium. This is going to be a 2-day diversity conference focused on supporting graduate students and postdoctoral scholars from underrepresented backgrounds. I encourage you to check out the Graduate School's website for more information. It will be coming up in May. So please do look out for that and register. Thank you again. I have gifts for everybody that's on the other side of the stage.
How can a piece of elephant dung help us rebuild a broken ecosystem? That's an example of what we're studying at Princeton, to understand how the natural world works. Because when we know how things work, we have the power to bring them back to life when they're damaged. Our field research centers are living laboratories where we can design controlled experiments to test our theories. Elephants are a keystone species. What happens if we lose them? What do wild animals actually eat? And what does that mean for the world? Can we revive a damaged landscape within a single lifetime? Each new discovery leads to new questions that will help us heal our planet. And those are the questions we're asking here at Princeton. I'm Rob Pringle, and I'm a biologist and conservationist at Princeton.
I chose SPIA because it's an institution that invests in public service and invests in the students as well. You are in classrooms taught by top-notch academics and surrounded by people who come from just all over. When you come to campus, you will find yourself surrounded by like-minded individuals who are very passionate about public service, and you find yourself part of a collaborative community that was doing whatever it can to support you as a student.
The world needs new ways of thinking about extinction, disease, polarization, inequality, the future of life as we know it. Princeton is daring to ask the questions that will push us from the present to the possible.
Many ecosystems have been damaged by human activities. But what if there's hope? What if we use DNA sequences to understand and restore balance? Could we bring a broken landscape back within our lifetime?
Growing up, I always wanted to help people. But I noticed that not everyone's rights were respected in the same way.
What if justice was something everyone was guaranteed?
Where I'm from, people have a choice. Leave to succeed, or stay and be stuck. Maybe they don't have to choose. What if we created real opportunities in rural communities?
There is still so much to learn from the human genome. What if we could harness the power of computers to help cure disease?
The world needs to be reimagined. Princeton dares to seek, dares to explore, to collaborate, to venture forward, so we may move from the present to the possible.
The concrete is the second most used material in the world after water, and the concrete is actually the number one used material in the world if we speak about man-made materials. My name is Branko Glišić. I'm Associate Professor in Civil and Environmental Engineering, and my area of the research is in structural health monitoring. Structural health monitoring means installing the sensors of the structure and trying to understand if there are any strange behaviors, which we like to call unusual behaviors, and if yes, if those unusual behaviors are within the limits of normal, or there is some issue with the structure that has to be fixed.
So what we are doing is to installing deformation sensors in the structure. On that particular day, my job was to install the sensors. So we attach the sensors to the reinforcement of a column, for example, and then to be there during the pouring process so that we can guarantee the integrity of the sensors, make sure that it's still working while it's being poured. It's also interesting to capture the very first curing of concrete, so you can capture, for example, the heating of concrete. And it's also important to capture data of things that you don't have in mind right now, because they might become interesting in the future.
So this is East Parking Garage of Princeton University, the new structure. And we are at the site, you know, they are completing the construction slowly, and we are measuring the deformations of the foundation. What is unique with this project is that we have sensors in horizontal elements, which are slabs. We have sensors in vertical elements, which are columns, and we also have sensors in the foundation. So it is expected to work, and we see that the garage is, working well. But however, what we don't know, and we don't have experience, is what is the behavior in long terms, when we go over 5, 10, 20 years. And this is where the sensor can help us understand the behavior and then improve as we go.
In terms of the engineering aspect, I was able to see how the production process is organized, how they're able to manufacture so many of these pieces in such an efficient way. It was also interesting to understand where should you put your sensors and what the challenge involved on how you put the sensors. So when you're designing, for example, your structural health monitoring strategy, you have to think, okay, I want to put my sensor here, but how am I actually going to reach this place when this is being manufactured? So that has to be something that's thought about before. On a professional level, I was not also very knowledgeable about how is the interaction between, let's say, an academic partner and a private partner. Usually, these structures are not monitored, so this is kind of a special project, and that breaks their manufacturing process line. So you have also to design this. When should I be there? When would be the least impactful time for me to install my sensors to make sure that they're working? Another thing that's very interesting, and I think we could do a better job there, is to engage the workers in the community in what we were doing. They're usually very curious about what you're doing because it's something different for them. So there are all these aspects that are more social and not so technical. But I thought they were very relevant. That is very difficult to get when you're just sitting with a computer or being inside the lab.
So our laws of physics can explain the 5% of stuff that we know of. But to explain the missing 95%, we need something that goes beyond what we know already, beyond our current laws of physics. I'm Jo Dunkley, and I'm a cosmologist. Cosmology is the study of the universe as a whole thing. It means trying to understand how it began, what it's made of, how it's got to be where it is today, and what's going to happen to it in the future. So when we look into space, there's no reason why the things that we see should be all that's out there. You see the bright lights of the stars, but there may be something more.